Todd Caponi, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it too.
Todd, can't wait to learn more about four levers negotiating, the simple, counterintuitive way to higher deal values and lasting trust. Before we get to that, Todd, would love to know a little bit more about you, whereabouts you grew up, and how your upbringing helped contribute to who you've become.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in a household where my father was always in sales and sales leadership. It was back in the time when it was the two martini lunches and that sort of thing. I don't know. My dad always had such a great mood on and seemed to really enjoy what he did. But back then, this is the 1990s, 1980s, sales still didn't have that positive connotation. But I remember I went to Indiana University. I was studying marketing. And I remember a woman came in from the local newspaper, the Indiana Daily Student, so the university newspaper. And she was like, "Hey, we're hiring salespeople to sell ads." And I was thinking I should get a job. I don't want to work Taco Bell or something. Like, I'm going to go apply for that. And I got it. And as much as I was not like sales oriented at the time, I found that I was inspired by it. Like, I enjoyed going out and talking to people and meeting people and building relationships. As I graduated from college, I got into sales because that's like by default. It was not on purpose. I found over time, though, that I loved the relationship part of it, but the rest of it just didn't feel right to me. The things that leaders were driving me to do, 50 calls a day, and oh, you've got 101 fever today, rub some dirt in it, get to work, right? Like that whole thing. When you mentioned the new book, Four Levers Negotiating, negotiating always felt gross to me. Cold calling people felt gross to me. But I'd always had a bit of a bent towards a couple of things. Number one is I've always found it interesting, the decision and behavioral science of how we as human beings just engage and prioritize and then trigger purchase decisions. That if we use it for good, not evil, we can apply to so much. And I also got into this kind of passion for leadership and helping other people see the light. Now, I know you're going to ask me about this. I know most people are only listening and not watching, but behind me in my office, I've built a bit of a museum to the history of the sales profession. So there's books, magazines, old phones. It smells a little bit like the corner of your grandmother's basement in here, but I've also developed a real passion for the history of the sales profession, of which there's some elements of it that they got right that we get wrong today. And I'm really trying to bring a lot of that to the world of sales as well.
That's why both your book really resonated with me and the message that you're sharing, Todd, in that I've also spent most of my career in sales and understand the need for us to sell our ideas, even for the CEOs of the most effective organizations, whether it is in dealing with external stakeholders, their board, their team members, they need to consistently sell. However, there is this negative association with that word sales, or when you talk about negotiation, same thing. People almost feel slimy. They don't want to go into negotiation.
Right.
Being that you're a student of the history of sales and negotiation, why is that?
I'll tell you this. So in my last role, I was the chief revenue officer of a company based in Chicago called Power Reviews. And while your listener may have never heard of them, you've probably used the technology and not realized it. Meaning, by Power Reviews, we were in the review space for retailers and brands. So you're buying a pair of Crocs on Crocs.com or a sweater on Vineyard Vines. You look at the product, you scroll down, there was reviews. That was us. We're the engine behind the collect and display of those reviews. Here's what happened. And I guess this is even more of an origin story because there was a research study that we did with Northwestern University, just looking at buyer behavior when a website is acting as a salesperson. All right. So I thought, what does that have to do with human to human or B2B type selling? But it literally, the research caused me to, a lunatic, quit my job and write a book. It was my first book called The Transparency Sale. I think my high school English teacher is probably still laughing at the thought that I've written anything coherent, but Here's the research that came out of it. Number one, no surprise. We all read reviews today when we're buying something we've never bought before that matters, right? So no surprise there. But here's the 2 data points that changed my life. I know that sounds really nerdy, but number one is, for all the listeners out there, when you're reading reviews, you go to a website, you're reading the reviews, do you go to the negative reviews first? Do you skip the 5s and go to the 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s first? Almost all of us do. Doesn't make you weird, it makes you human. And then the last data point is, on a 5-star scale, when a product has an average review score between a 4.2 and a 4.5, that's actually optimal for purchase conversion. In other words, a product that has negative reviews right under it sells faster and more often than a product that has nothing but perfect 5-star reviews. And so I looked at that and thought, all right, wait, I've got a whole team here that we've been driving and teaching to sell as though we're a 5. Like, we're awesome, our competitors suck, right? And are we actually doing a disservice to our customers? And then to your question, are we actually repelling our customers, making them go, because at a subconscious level, we all know that perfection doesn't exist. And there's a reason why we go to the negative first. Now, I looked at that and thought, does that apply to human or B2B selling? We started trying it. And by trying it, I mean being honest and being transparent and sharing with potential customers first what we give up to be great at our core. Hey, in your circumstance, you might not love this, but if you're cool with it, you're going to love this. And suddenly, our sales cycles sped up, our win rates went up. We were working on the opportunities we should be winning more firmly. We were losing the opportunities that we're going to lose anyway faster. And we differentiated in the way that we sold, which turned us into Chicago's fastest growing tech company from 2014 to 2017. And I was like, wait, honesty and transparency, it feels good. Like, we should be doing it. But as it turns out, it sells better too. And so, to put a bow on your question, there is my favorite sales quote of all time. It's from 1922. It's from a guy named Arthur Dunn in his book, Scientific Selling and Advertising. And here's the quote. So you're reading the book and there's regular pages. And then you turn the page, there's one sentence on the page. That's it. The rest of the page is white. And here's the sentence. If the truth won't sell it, don't sell it. It's just like such a simple thought in the 1920s, 1910s, that we are there to be truth tellers. We are there to provide a service, which is to help our customers predict, not to convince them. And that led to my first book, and that applied all the way down to negotiating as well.
Todd, what you're saying makes so much sense. However, it runs counter to a lot of what is written and talked about with respect to sales. I wanted to throw out a couple of relevant points on the leadership element that connect as well to that. One is, I'm sure you're familiar with the pratfall effect, where even with leaders, we don't like perfection. We like leaders that are competent, but we can see that transparency, some of their flaws. And I love the story of the Starbucks logo, where initially they had a purely symmetrical face to the woman that is on the cup. People didn't like that as much. So they tested, and now one of the eyes, if you look at it closely, is a tiny bit off center. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. That transparency, that authenticity helps us relate better, therefore is better for sales, better for negotiating. Why is it that we've been told most of our lives, and there's so much literature out there, not science-based, telling us to hold our cards close to our chest when it comes whether to sales or negotiations?
It's amazing to me when you look at, so 1890s, you had an industrial revolution going on. You had companies that were starting to hire their own salespeople for the first time ever and train them, give them variable compensation plans, give them quotas, there were sales kickoffs. And the basis for the sales profession was one word: service. The word service. I've got a book here, and you can't see it, I know, because most of you are listening, but I'm holding a book from 1911, and it's from my favorite philosopher on sales, a guy named Arthur Sheldon. So another Arthur. Book is called The Art of Selling. And he's got a line in here, as he was the guy that really laid the foundation for the sales profession. It was him and a guy named John Patterson from NCR. But Arthur Sheldon's quote in this book is, "True salesmanship is the science of service. Grasp that thought firmly and never let go." So you had a profession that was founded on this idea that salespeople were not there to pound and convince. Salespeople were there to help customers make great decisions and achieve outcomes they may have never thought possible. All right. So we get into the 1920s, the early 1920s, there was a depression that nobody talks about. So you got the Great Depression, late 1920s. Early 1920s, it's called the Forgotten Depression of the early 1920s. And suddenly, manufacturers, they didn't stop manufacturing. So there's tons of inventory, but people stopped buying. And so suddenly we got into this, hey, sales isn't about service. Sales is about getting rid of this inventory, because machines that aren't machining cost a lot of money, go clear. And so high pressure sales became gross. In the 1910s, you had sales being taught in every major university, 1910s. And in high schools, there were high schools teaching sales. In 1916, big sales conference, the first of its kind, happened in Detroit, Michigan, called the World Sales Congress. The keynote speaker was then sitting President Woodrow Wilson. And it wasn't because he happened to be in town and was like, oh, come back. No, he had a specific message for the salespeople of the world, or of the country specifically, that this was our chance. And the motto of that entire conference was one word: service. And so that's like the origination of the profession, was to help customers achieve optimal outcomes and be a guide, be a navigator. But we lost that through the 1920s, the Depression, 10 years of high pressure sales, World War II. You've suddenly generationed out service. The people that were practicing service were retired or gone. So all of a sudden, sales from the 1940s to however long became this high pressure, gross force. Our job is to convince. I believe two things. Number one, we don't buy when we're convinced. We buy when we can predict, right? We are prediction machines. That's why we go to the negative reviews first. That's why we don't believe perfection. That's why we need it to trigger purchase decisions. That's number one. But number two is, there's so much talk about, oh, the world has changed and customers have access to so much more information. Like, we hear that every single day. I would argue that sales, that traditional opinion or the kind of approach that you talked about, that have always been inherent to the way that we thought, was based on an era when the sale was the peak of the relationship. The like 1990s, you sell something, you lie a little, you exaggerate a little. What are they going to do? A letter, call an 800 number? Today, the proliferation of information, everything we do, buy, and experience, means you have to tell the truth, right? You can't get away with it. And sale is no longer the peak. It's merely an early milestone to having customers that not only buy, but they stay, they buy more, they advocate, they post about it, they take you with them to their next company. I just think the world has changed, and transparency has to be the way. And that old school method, it worked in an era when it could work. I just don't think it's sustainable.
I saw a lot of relevance to what you're talking about, to even internal interactions in organizations, in selling
Yes.
ideas, in negotiating, because while the sale was presented inaccurately, I agree with you, as something that was one and done and you could not be transparent, in the ongoing relationships in the organization, or with funders or with clients, the kind of mindset you're talking about, whether in sales or negotiations, becomes even more important.
Yeah. The old phrase that, like, hey, you got to play the long game, right? The long game wins the long game. Of course it does. It was funny. I was over in Amsterdam doing a keynote a few months ago, And I stood in the square. I don't know if you've been to Amsterdam there, but in the square, I was looking around, and I think it was 1601 in Amsterdam, right off the square was the first stock exchange, right? The first stock exchange happened there. And I took a little selfie by it, which is stupid, but I did it. But it really struck me that, hey, for all the leaders that are listening here, we have been taught that short-term wins because we've got investors that we have to satisfy. We've got forecasting that we have to hit. And as a result, we get so focused on the short term that long-term thinking becomes, I'll worry about that next quarter, next year, because that next quarter, next year, I might not have a job if I don't do this right now. And I argue that in this world, again, of this proliferation of information and AI exposing everything, like if you can use Google, you can use ChatGPT, like your buyers are not stupid. I believe the long game wins the long game, but if you do it right, the long game helps you win the short game, because even if you qualify out of an opportunity because you're not the right fit, because you might think that there's a better alternative for that customer in that instance than you, and you make that referral, that comes back to you 3-4 times. The opposite of that is if you jam home a deal that you weren't the right fit, even if they don't know before they sign, they're going to know after they signed. And guess what? Your inbound line, your inbound leads, the referrals, you're going to lose 5, 10, 20, 100 deals that you never knew existed because they're not calling you. I believe that in this era, the long game has to be the prevalent strategy of every organization. It wins the long game, but it wins the short game too. I think you'll be out of a job faster playing short-term focus versus thinking long-term and being truly transparent with your customers.
It is a great mindset to have, whether dealing with customers or relationships inside the organization. In your book, you focus on negotiation as part of the relationship, Todd.
Yes.
Now, most of us, when we hear negotiation, we start thinking tips, tricks, tools. I work with a lot of CEOs and leadership teams, and in many instances, the leadership team members have to work on a budget that they then present to the rest of the leadership team. So there is a level of convincing and there's a level of negotiations. And in many instances, people are looking for the tips and tricks that are going to convince other people. But you say tips and tricks won't do it in negotiation and in convincing others.
Yeah, when I first got promoted into revenue leadership, it was a bunch of years ago. And I had always been taught that negotiation requires a different personality than selling. And that always felt terrible to me. Like selling and sales with your customers that are supposed to be around forever, that you're supposed to have a relationship with, you're supposed to care about them. So we do that. We build the relationship, we build trust all the way to the goal line. We're focused on their outcomes. And then they say, yes, I want to buy from you. And then I was always taught that, all right, that trigger, your yes, tells me subconsciously it's time for me to start lying to you. I'm not going to tell you what a good deal is. I know I was focused on your outcomes. Now I'm going to focus on my outcomes. And I learned everything I know about negotiating from former FBI, not hostage negotiators. Like, what? Like, that was crazy to me. I believe that stuff has its place. There's a very popular book that I think is fantastic. It's behavioral science, it's FBI intrigue, it's awesome. But in this world where, again, the deal is no longer the peak of the relationship, it's merely an early milestone, I just don't believe that eroding trust and becoming selfish right at the goal line is a sustainable approach. I also don't believe, again, talking to transparency, this idea that every single one of your customers is paying a different amount based on how well or poorly you negotiated it. I don't understand how that's sustainable. The peer connections are growing and growing. There's a book from 1904 that I was just reading here called The Tales of the Road. And there's an article right here that talks about a guy who would negotiate with each customer based on how mean they were to him. If they were really mean, he would discount more. If they were really nice to him, he'd take them to the cleaner. And what happened? Those customers talked. And suddenly, nobody wanted to buy from him anymore. And that's 1904. What year is it? Like, the ability for customers to connect has never been greater, and it's growing. AI is exposing pricing models at such a massive rate that I think there's an opportunity for us to provide a sound basis for the way that we deliver and propose our pricing or commercial terms, whatever it is, and then provide flexibility. That's why the book's called Four Levers Negotiating, because there's four things that drive your business that you can push and pull to provide that flexibility, but to get value and create consistency across your customer base. I just think, again, I'm totally biased, right? I wrote a book on it, of course, but I just don't think it's sustainable, this old way, changing personalities and everybody's paying a different amount because you had a good day.
Now, you also mentioned the four levers. Would love for you to explain the four levers and how they relate to negotiating.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a quick little story. As I had gotten promoted into sales and revenue leadership, one of my sales reps that worked on my team was working on a really big deal. Now, what I teach here applies to big or small deals, applies to everything, and it should be consistent. But he was working on this deal. The customer said, "Hey, we're ready, but we need to talk about the pricing and the terms." And so my rep called me and was like, "Todd, help." I'm like, so I get on a plane, head down to Houston, me, my rep, and then I'm thinking I'm going to meet with this one person at this company. I walk in and they brought their whole procurement team. And there was at least one person drooling. "Girl, let's go." Like one of those, this was going, and I was terrible at it. I've just always been horrible at that kind of situation. So I'm sweating, like I'm anxious. Oh, crap. But these people are about to completely boat race me out of this room. And I'm a newly appointed SVP of sales, first time. My rep's going to go, "This guy is weak." So I had double pressure. I accidentally spilled my cards face up on the table, actually on a whiteboard behind them, where I had just had a conversation with my CFO a couple of days earlier, and it was fresh on my mind. But there's essentially four things that drive every for-profit business and drives every for-profit business's pricing model, or so it should. And those four things are, number one, volume, or how much stuff the customer's buying from you, right? Product, technology, services, location, hours, whatever it is. You want the customer to commit to the largest amount of volume possible. Large, better; short, like smaller, not as good. Number two is the timing of cash, or in other words, how fast they pay. You want customers to pay you faster, not slower. Who knew? We like money. Number three is the length of commitment, or how long they commit to your products, technology, and services. Longer, better; shorter, not as good. And number four is predictability, or the timing of the deal. Meaning, you as a leader, you've got a responsibility to help your investors predict. You've got to forecast the business. You've got to make investments so that you can resource the deals that you're doing. You need to make sure you've got people available, so that predictability of timing is really valuable. So what ended up happening is I shared that. I said, "Hey, listen, our pricing model and our whole organization are based on these four things: how much you buy, how fast you pay, how long you commit, when you sign. That's what the pricing's based on. Hope that's helpful." And they're like, "Fascinating. Don't care. We need a 30% discount." I'm like, all right. We had a little human conversation, but then I took them through it and I was like, "These are the four things we're willing to pay you for in the form of discount or concession. Commit to more stuff. That helps us. Valuable. We'll pay you in the form of a discount. Pay us faster. Commit to a longer term. Help us predict our business. Let's mutually align around it." It became this cards face up. Instead of customer vendor, it was a bunch of us sitting around a table trading cards back and forth. They got it because their business is run on the same four levers as ours. We walked out of the room with a 3-year deal. They paid for the whole 3 years up front so they could get a discount. Super valuable to us. We didn't have to go get a Series B. And they helped us predict. We hit our quarter, and it helped us invest and make sure the resources were ready so that they could hit the ground running too. It's a simple concept. Internalize those four levers, communicate them when you talk about pricing, when you propose it. Negotiation becomes so much easier, and it becomes that consistent sound basis. Our pricing is based on something. It's not made up and you got to come after me.
That level of transparency is very different than the way a lot of us approach negotiating, whether it is with customers or internally within departments or within teams in the organization.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. There's a quote from one of these books from 1927 that's, again, the 20s when things had shifted and they got a little gross. And the quote was essentially, never share the price until the customer thinks it's more. That makes me like, ugh, but no, like that's insane. I was taught many times that, hey, don't even talk about pricing until you get to the executive buy or whatever it is. No, your price should, unless you're a startup, unless it's a new offering, brand new offering, and you haven't established any market value for your solutions, price should be your price with the flexibility of the 4 levers. Share with everybody. Share with that person that gets coffee for the janitor. Like, doesn't matter. Your price should be your price transparently. And again, to this idea that there's so much movement. Like when I talked about my origin story, my dad, he worked for the same company for 42 years. Who does that anymore? Nobody. So your customers are taking you with them to their next company. And it's funny that when you share these levers the right way and consistently, they remember them. I've got a story of a customer that went to another one, and I went to another company, called me. I was a CRO at the time, and was like, hey, Todd, hey, I'm at this new company. We love you guys. We want to bring you in. What can you do for me? And I'm like, how long have you known me? And he's like, is it the levers again? And I was like, yeah, it's the levers. And I took him through it. And he was able to use them to negotiate his own price in a way that was really valuable and consistent with our entire customer base. That's the power of this. It's transparent. It establishes confidence in your pricing model to everybody you communicate it to. And it's highly consistent that you don't have to worry about, oh, I hope they don't talk about pricing at that event they're at, because they're going to find out that he got a better deal than it's like, no, now it's consistent across all of those areas. And at its core, it's really easy for your sales organization, your client success organization, your account management organization, anybody who's talking price loses that anxiety that they feel when they suddenly have to go, is this going to be okay? Of course, that's the price. And either it's not or it is. And again, there's flexibility. If there's things you want to pay us for, we're willing to reciprocate.
So one of the things I want to understand a little bit better, Todd, is whether and how human heuristics play a role in that. I'm sure you're familiar with, for example, what Kahneman had talked about, which is an anchoring bias we have.
Mhm.
I was at a fundraiser recently, a gala for an organization here in Greater Washington. First, they started out with a paddle raise of people giving $10,000. Person next to me said, these people have been seeded. They know ahead of time they're going to give $10,000 because when they give the $10,000, then more people are willing to give $5,000. And when they get to 1,000, a lot more paddles go up, so on and so forth. So there is a human heuristic that plays into that. However, that's not transparency, because if they were being really transparent, they would say, you know what, these two $10,000 people, they're already on our board. They already have committed $10,000, and we don't really need all of you to give us 5,000. We just need, I don't know, 20 at 1,000 and 50 at $100. Where does transparency play a role when on the other end you have human heuristics that gets us to commit at different levels financially and otherwise?
Yeah, I'm always an advocate of everything that is the opposite of either what I call word art or trickery that gets people to empty their wallet faster than other ways. What it reminds me of is I was recently in New York, and there's a restaurant in New York called Au Cheval. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they're known for their cheeseburgers. And the cheeseburgers, though, they're each between $34 and $38. So that's an expensive cheeseburger, but the restaurant's packed. And there's people like, cheeseburgers, no bacon. I'm like, whatever. They're going crazy for this stuff. Now, can you imagine if they hid that price and then said it's $36 for your burger? People would freak out. What do? The minute you walk in, they give you a menu. It's $34 to $38. It is cards face up. Now, they've never, I would assume, had anybody say, hey, I was down the street. There's a place, it's a restaurant, it's called McDonald's. I can get a cheeseburger And I can get, if they give you fries and a drink with it for $8.50. Why am I paying $34? That's never happened in the history of Au Chabelle. Now, the point being that when we talk about heuristics and anchoring, I work with a few large clients that are higher end price versus many ankle biter competitors that are coming in cheap. There's tons of cheap alternatives. I've guided them to, hey, in the first conversation, as a part of transparency, to be able to share with the customer, hey, listen, before we get too deep into this, your pricing is probably going to be between X and Y. And if that's going to be way off of what you even are able to conjure, let's talk about that now versus later. Because I believe if you're talking about a 7-figure solution to a 4-figure or 5-figure buyer, one of you's in the wrong conversation anyway. But to your point, now you've set that expectation. At the end of the cycle, they're not going, hey, I found somebody that's $80. No, that's not happening anymore because you set that expectation and you gave the opportunity to qualify in or qualify out at the beginning. I would also argue the term sticker shock has never been associated with anything good in the history of humankind, right? So lay that out there, win fast, but second place to winning fast is losing fast. I think that's your opportunity to set that anchor.
And I imagine that's also why you're not a big advocate for artificial deadlines and things like
Yes.
that in negotiating.
Oh, absolutely. Like the fake expiring discounts. I always joke that if you ever shop at Kohl's, the retailer, and you pay full price, we can't be friends, right? Because there's always a discount. Like just go to their website, there's a whole page, like here, discounts, click on it, right? When I talk through the 4 levers, that 4th lever I call the timing of the deal. And my flip on that and my perspective on that is, what are you paying for? Now, fake expiring discount is trying to create some artificial motivation to get somebody to buy on your timeline, even if they have no means to buy on your timeline. And we've all been taught as buyers that, hey, if you're offering it now, then it also means that if I don't buy on time, but then I wait some more, you'll probably offer it again. Like that price is probably the price I'm going to pay whenever I buy. When I talk about the timing of the deal in that 4th lever, what I'm saying is this: there's tremendous value in our ability to predict our business. Like your business, you've got forecasts, you've got to make investments, you've got a resource. If you're willing to help us predict, if we can mutually align around the timing of this, and I'll be your guide through this, here's the things we're going to do together. But if you can stick to it, that's something I'm willing to pay you for. I'll pay you in the form of said concession or discount to help us predict. That becomes a completely different conversation versus the fake, hey, like this quarter only, 10%. No, stop it. It's me. I'm paying for something. What am I paying for? I'm paying for predictability, not jamming a deal in unnaturally, which will end up costing me later anyway, because even if they don't buy, that's going to be the price in their mind going forward. You've re-anchored them the minute you've thrown a fake expiring discount out there.
When we think about our own purchase behavior, that makes sense. However, the practices in a lot of organizations don't align with that. So what you're saying is common sense when we think about how we view brands, how we view services, products, salespeople, but a lot of practices in organizations don't fully align with what makes sense that you're talking about. Now, would love for you to shed some thoughts on, outside of dealing with external stakeholders and clients, how these apply within the organization.
Yeah, it's funny that, the 4 levers are really designed for business to business type transactions. Now, it's funny though, I'll tell you a quick story here that might relate. So I'm not one of those like fancy car guys. I buy like an old Ford. And so a few years ago, I was going to buy a Ford Explorer and I was looking for slightly used ones, right? Because the minute you buy a new one off the lot, you know the story there. So I went online, I just Googled, what are the 3 best ways to get the best deal when buying a used car? And so I got all these ideas back, but there was 3 common things that came up. The number 1 was, don't tell them how you intend to pay until you've negotiated the price of the car. So if you're going to write a check, if you're going to finance through them, if you're going to lease, wait. Number two is if you've got a trade in, don't tell them about that until you've negotiated the price of the car. And then number three is there's something wrong with your trade in. For goodness sake, don't tell them that. Let them find it. And so I looked at these three things, and there was a few Ford Explorers that kind of matched what I was looking for at different dealers. But I went into the first one and I was like, hey, I'm going to have some fun with this, but I have a theory that this is actually going to help me. I did the opposite of all three within the first 10 minutes of talking to my salesperson. So I walk in, I'm like, hey, I'm interested in this car. And they assign a rep. His name was Frankie. We go into his office and I said, hey, Frankie, first of all, here's my check. Like I'm like, I've got financing worked out. Number two is that Jeep Grand Cherokee in the parking lot. That's mine. I'm intend to trade that in. And do you see the smoke swirling behind it in the parking lot? This is no joke. The check engine light was not only on, but it was flashing, which I've later learned means the car is about to burst into flames. And so it was funny. I shared all of that in the first 5 minutes. Frankie, within the next 10 minutes, shared his story of challenges with ADHD, his relationship issues with his father. He talked about issues that he's got with his job and how much he dislikes it. I did use it for a little evil. I got to admit, I did ask him, hey, how do car salespeople get paid? Like, I've never understood the whole model. He pulled his compensation plan off of his credenza, gives it to me. And as we're talking, I'm reading his actual compensation plan. Now, it's funny that I ended up buying the car from him and I got the deal that paid him the least he could possibly make on a car. So again, I did use it for a little evil. But the point being is transparency always begets transparency. You would be so shocked when you share unexpected honesty, the way that reciprocates back to you. So I would argue that in any instance where you're trying to influence somebody to do something different, whether it's an internal negotiation, whether it's a purchase, whether it's negotiating a deal, that when we lead with transparency and we are cards face up in our approach, you will sense and that the conversation will completely change. You don't put yourself at a disadvantage. I'm telling you over and over again, people can't help but reciprocate that transparency and that collaboration. And you'll find, so whatever the instance is, whatever the negotiation is, when you can go in and go, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. And here's the part that sucks, right? And here's what I'm trying to get at. And being able to share that cards face up, I think you'll quickly find resolutions speed up and relationships will build.
I love that on so many levels, Todd. And I have to tell you, dozens of years of working with top CEOs and leadership teams and hundreds of conversations for this podcast, that is also one of the best ways for a leader to deal with and interact with their team members. It is a different mindset. However, with that level of transparency, people are willing to bend over backwards for their leaders.
Exactly.
So I think it is outstanding way to approach sales. It is a beautiful mindset for negotiating, and it is exactly the right approach for leadership as well.
Thank you. Yeah, my first book is called The Transparency Sale. My second one is The Transparent Sales Leader. And it's not just about transparency. It's actually a framework for revenue leadership on a bed of transparency. And then the new book that just came out is 4 Levers Negotiating that kind of takes you deep into that part of it. But yeah, that's always been my mindset. And again, it goes back to this idea that being transparent and being honest, it feels good. Like I think most human beings feel that way, but I would argue it sells better, it retains better, it grows better, it leads better, it negotiates better. It's got so much power to it that why wouldn't we? Stop with the, hey, that's the way my father used to do it. No, I think there's an opportunity for us to just think clearly about the world, the proliferation of information, the rise of AI. I think now is the time more than at any other era in our humanity where we've got to start embracing this.
It is the time for us to become more human again. Love that. So for the audience to both find out about your book and follow your work, where would you send them to, Todd?
Yeah, I think toddcaponi.com is a good place to start. It's got all kinds of stuff there. You can follow or connect with me on LinkedIn. I do share a bunch of my nonsense there. As a side note, we talked a little bit of history. My hobby is the history of sales. I've got a podcast called the Sales History Podcast, where I just find a topic, I dig deep into it, and then I share for 14 to 20 minutes an episode, just the lessons through that lens. There's so much historical context there. So if you're looking for another listen, once you get done with your podcast, of course, it's called the Sales History Podcast, if you want to go check that out as well.
I really appreciate you and your insights, Todd. Thank you so much for the conversation, Todd Caponi.
Thanks for having me. This is a blast.